Chapter 2353. Mountain and Sea Realm, Frigid Northern Heaven Abyss, Plentiful Heaven Continent. Zhou Xian had just finished his night of cultivation. He pushed open the door of his immortal's cave and looked up to see the misty mountains that lay in the middle of a winding river after the rain. Occasionally, the cries of cranes could be heard, and when the hazy clouds moved slowly, light would shine down. It was like a painting of mountains and rivers. After looking at it for a long time, he sighed. The scenery of the plentiful heaven continent was something he could never get tired of. However, in this vast area, he was the only Taoist cultivator, and there were no other Taoists. It was a very lonely place. Although he could be considered a disciple of the Qinsong sect, he had inherited the Taoist teachings of the Yuxiao school, which had long since been destroyed. Furthermore, there were only a few people who had inherited them. Other than the fact that they had taken the same Taoist teachings as the patriarch, there was no master-disciple relationship between them. Even when a master was reincarnated, the Qinsong school would receive him, and there was no need for a disciple to do so. Not only that, but all divine abilities and cultivation techniques had to be reported to the Qinsong school before they could be cultivated. Because of this, there was no longer a close connection between the transmission of techniques between the seniors and juniors. Therefore, it was impossible for the sect to expand. He understood why this was done, and felt that it was the right thing to do. After gaining a deeper understanding of the Taoist magic of the sect, he felt that as long as there was an outstanding disciple who was determined to revive the Taoist teachings, then the sect could be revived. That would not be a good thing for the sect. However, this sort of attitude from the sect affected the disciples beneath them. As time passed, this place became a remote place that no one was willing to approach, causing him to seem as if he was an exiled person. Even when he went out to visit his friends, those fellow disciples would treat him extremely coldly, and this truly caused him to feel helpless. Just as he was feeling lost, a servant hurried over. "Master, there's a guest outside. He says he's an old acquaintance of yours." Old acquaintance? Zhou Xian was surprised. He had no idea who it was that would come to visit him. He asked about the person's appearance, but the servant couldn't give him any details. Realizing that this person was no ordinary person, he said, "Invite him over." The servant accepted the order and left. Not long after, a young Taoist wearing a black robe walked over. Zhou Xian felt that the person who came was extremely familiar. When he looked at him again, the memories of his previous life surged into his mind. Not only that, even his body had returned to the time before his Tao foundation was damaged in his previous life. At this moment, he seemed to have woken up from a long dream. He unfolded his sleeves, looked at himself, and then looked in front of him. He said in surprise, "Junior brother, is that you?" Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands. "Senior brother Zhou, long time no see." Zhou Chongju sized him up and nodded repeatedly. "It really is junior brother." He didn't feel the slightest bit uncomfortable because of the change in Zhang Yan's identity. He stepped aside and said, "Junior brother, come in and have a seat. You and I haven't seen each other for a long time. Today is the right time to catch up." Zhang Yan also nodded and said, "Senior brother, please come in." The servant was a little puzzled. He remembered that his master had been cultivating for 100 years. Other than a disciple who was sent by the sect to learn, he had always been cultivating alone. When did he have a junior brother? However, the two seemed to be familiar with each other. As a servant, he didn't dare to ask too much. Zhou Chongju and Zhang Yan sat in the inner room and ordered the servant to serve tea. At this moment, he looked at the people and things in front of him. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to the fishing boat at Qinsong School. For a moment, he was filled with emotions. Zhang Yan said, "Senior brother, are you used to living here?" Zhou Chongju smiled and said, "In the past, I still had some complaints, but just now that my memories have returned, I feel that it's not bad. This place is quiet, very suitable for me. If I were to refine pills here, no one would come and disturb me." Just now, he was clear that the arrangements in the sect were actually according to the intention of his original body before he was reincarnated. It was just that this body's temperament was not compatible. But now, there was naturally no such problem. According to the time in the mortal world, the two could be considered to have not seen each other for thousands of years. They both talked about what happened after they parted. Unknowingly, the sky darkened. Zhou Chongju said, "Junior brother, now that you have reached the peak of Tao, there is nothing in the great Tao that can be hidden from you. However, I have a question. I wonder what happened to the Taoist who taught us?" Zhang Yan smiled but didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and said, "Senior brother, it's time for me to go." Zhou Chongju also stood up and said, "Junior brother, where are you going?" Zhang Yan looked into the distance and said, "Searching for Tao." Zhou Chongju was slightly surprised and said, "With junior brother's current ability, are you still going to search for Tao?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "On the path of Tao, there is no end." Zhou Chongju thought for a while and slowly nodded. At the same time, he sighed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior brother, don't be melancholy. If you want to see me in the future, you can come to the Azure Sky Hall to find me." Zhou Chongju was startled, then he also smiled and said, "Then I won't keep junior brother here today." After Zhang Yan bowed, he waved his sleeves and left. He flew into the sky and got further and further away until he disappeared into the sky with the clouds. Zhou Chongju stood there and watched Zhang Yan's figure disappear into the world. At this moment, the wind and clouds moved. A young cultivator descended from the clouds and came close to him. He bowed and said, "Greetings, mister." He was a little confused. Mr. seemed to have changed his appearance and aura today, but he just knew that this person was still the same person. He looked in the direction that Zhang Yan left and said, "So there is a visitor today, who is it?" Zhou Chongju didn't hide anything and said, "It's Hall Master Du Zhen." Hall Master Du Zhen? The young cultivator thought for a while, Hall Master Ning? Or Hall Master Luo who just returned? He suddenly thought of a person. His eyes widened and his heart beat wildly. He couldn't help but look in the direction that Zhang Yan disappeared. It can't be that person, right? After Zhang Yan left, he crossed countless realms in an instant and came to the top of a snow-covered mountain. He looked at the azure seawater and the pure and flawless sky in the distance. At this moment, he was looking at these things from the perspective of a person. If he didn't immerse himself in the world, he naturally wouldn't be able to appreciate these things. The omnipotent realm was both a person who entered the world and a person who adhered to the Tao. The two did not contradict each other. After he sat on the position of Tao Master, all the great virtues were pushed out from the absolute silence by him. The heavens were also reorganized. However, he didn't interfere with the specific changes and let the rules of the Tao settle on their own. It was no different from before. In the memories of the Taoist cultivators in the universe, there was no such thing as the heavens becoming one. They only knew that in the final battle, the spirit of creation was destroyed by him, the only great virtue that survived. All living beings were safe from then on. Now, in the universe, no matter if one was a human cultivator or a different species, as long as they walked on the path of Tao, they would be worshipped by the Tao Master's memorial tablet. Although he was the master of the Tao, he was a person who sought Tao and not someone who wanted to be the master of Tao. It was not his wish to be restrained here. His path of seeking Tao would not stop because of this. It was just that this Tao was no longer that Tao. However, the omnipotent realm could go far and close to people. Therefore, even if he wanted to climb higher as the omnipotent realm, he would still stay here. Only as a person who sought Tao, he would go to an even higher realm. However, the person who sought Tao still had to wait for the most suitable time to arrive. Above the waves at the foot of the mountain, a fishing boat floated by. A young man and a young girl were standing at the bow of the boat. Now that everyone was cultivating qi, the young girl's eyesight was especially good. When she was wiping her sweat, she unintentionally looked up and exclaimed, "Big brother, look, there seems to be someone on the snowy peak." The young man glanced over, but did not see anything. He said in a bad mood, "Where is there anyone? That is Mount Finality." The Taoist in the monastery said that the mountain is tens of thousands of feet high. The young girl pouted and said, "Are celestials not human?" She suddenly looked at the young man and said seriously, "Big brother, when we go back, I want to learn Tao." The man was silent for a while before he said, "Okay, the Taoist in the monastery said that I don't have the talent. Why don't I give it a try?" When the young girl heard him agree, she cheered and said with longing, "When I learn Tao, I can also be like the sisters of the Chiu family. I can go out to sea and fish by myself, and my parents can rest at home. They don't have to go out and work." The young man could not help but smile. This was not a foolish idea. Now, even an ordinary person would have the opportunity to learn Taoist techniques. People like them who fished for a living would only need a small boat to go out tens of thousands of miles to fish and play in the waves. This was something that they had never dared to imagine in the past. Zhang Yan stood on the peak of the mountain, so he naturally heard the conversation very clearly. He smiled, then turned around and said, "My two friends are here." Dan Yi and Huan Tong were standing far away. When they saw him looking over, they hurriedly cupped their fists. Dan Yi took a step forward and said, "Should I address you as Taoist master?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't need to test me. I am still me, and I haven't changed because of Tao. This heaven is not a heartless heaven, but a heaven with emotions." Dan Yi and Huan Tong both heaved a sigh of relief. Even though the heavenly order placed great emphasis on logic as soul refinement cultivators, they too saw the final convergence of the great Tao. They knew that this was the work of the spirit of creation, and they were worried that it would still be the spirit of creation that appeared in the end. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since the two of you came looking for me, you must have something to say. If you have anything to say, feel free to say it." Dan Yi cupped his fists and said, "Dare I ask, Master, after Bu Su heaven was created, the first 3 eras were when the human Tao flourished. In the future, there might be demons and monsters that came to replace me. Now that the heavens have merged, dare I ask, Master, can the human Tao continue to flourish?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Whether the human Tao flourishes or not, it's not up to me to decide, it's up to the human Tao itself." Dan Yi was deep in thought. He bowed again and took a step back. Zhang Yan looked at Huan Tong and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you have any questions?" Huan Tong solemnly cupped his fists at Zhang Yan and said with a solemn expression, "Dare I ask, Master, if everyone in this world can obtain Tao, and everyone can live forever, will the great Tao still accommodate the human Tao?" Zhang Yan looked up and said, "There's always a heaven beyond the heavens, and a world beyond the heavens. The great Tao can allow people to live forever, but it can't allow people to see longevity as the end. The path of Tao is endless, and there are endless changes." Genius 1 second. Remember this site address. Mobile version. Chapter 2354. To the north of Shaotang village, there was an altar over 30 feet tall. It was where the Taoist master was worshipped. In the various worlds, as long as one was a Taoist cultivator, they would worship the Taoist master's memorial tablet. This custom was spread throughout the mortal world along with the cultivation of Taoist. Now, all the bigger villages would set up altars to worship the Taoist master. Early one morning, a skinny middle-aged man with a hunting bow on his back brought a young man with an unconvinced expression to an altar. He handed a pheasant that he had hunted from the mountains to the altar keeper and led the young man to the top of the altar. When they arrived in front of a spirit tablet, he said, "Young, this is the Taoist master. Come and pay your respects." The young man was full of energy and arrogance. He straightened his neck and said, "I won't worship him. Isn't he the Taoist master? What's so great about him? Why should I worship him?" The middle-aged man slapped him and said, "Shut up, kid. Be careful not to offend the heavens." He then kicked the young man's leg and pointed, "Kneel down obediently. If you move, I'll break your leg." Even though Yang was unconvinced, he could only lower his head and kneel obediently. The middle-aged man was satisfied. He muttered, "That's like me. When he was young, he was also stubborn like this. Everything he saw was not pleasing to the eye, and he would do the exact opposite of what he was told to do. Every time, his father would disregard everything and scold him as soon as he came up. After that, he would do whatever he was told to do, never daring to go against it. At this moment, he also knelt down and kowtowed, "Taoist master, please bless me. Yang is young and ignorant. I apologize to you. Please don't blame me. The young man mumbled. The skinny old man said that Taoist master is the ruler of heaven and earth. He doesn't ask for worship or repayment. It's as if heaven and earth have no likes or dislikes. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, the rise and fall of the sun and moon, the rotation of the 4 seasons, it's all order. He won't be moved by the worship of the people. The people worship him because they are ignorant and want to gain some benefits. The middle-aged man raised his hand and slapped the back of his head. He pointed at his nose and scolded, "Your father knows more than you. The Taoist master doesn't ask for anything but I do. Today you should worship him. I don't ask for the Taoist master to take care of you. I just hope that he won't despise you. Do you think the heavens can talk nonsense?" The more he spoke, the angrier he got. I'm telling you, when Taoist master Yanjiao comes over tomorrow to preach the Tao, you must think of a way to become his disciple. If you can't become his disciple, I'll skin you alive when we get back. Do you know? After the middle-aged man scolded him, and said, he was defeated. Scolded. After Yang's sect, the Taoist master of the sect, he's disciple master, sect Yen, he was as he. Taoist Yang's Hua sect master of Tao sect disciples as he could. That Taoist masters of the sect master would as could Yang sect master was a young master. He was. He the sect master of Yuyang of Li Long as master. The sect master. Master as long as he was. The master was. When Yang arrived, he found that everyone was the same as him. They were boys and girls around the age of 10. When he saw so many people of the same age, he threw his reluctance to the back of his mind. Yang looked around. The boys and girls were separated. They didn't stand in the same place. Many young people were gathered in a few circles. They looked like they were shouting something. He walked to a circle and saw a fat young man. He said loudly, "My dad said that there are many benefits to cultivation. You don't need to eat after you cultivate. You can eat until you're full just by drinking the wind." Oh my, how much food would that save? I know. That's called fasting. But the wind isn't good at all. I still want to eat, that's right. It's the adults who lied to us. We're all going to drink the wind. They're eating delicious food. Yang pursed her lips and moved to another group of youths. In the middle of the group was a dark-skinned and spirited tall man. His saliva splattered everywhere as he said, "I heard from the village elder that after learning the Tao, you can poke soil into gold. Once I've mastered it, I can poke those soil lumps and turn them into gold lumps, poke them into gold lumps." As he spoke, he used his finger to poke around, his eyes filled with excitement. The teenager beside him let out a cry of surprise. Suddenly, a short boy said, "Oh no." The others looked at him in confusion. The short boy scratched his head. "There are so many soil lumps in my field. What if they are picked up by others?" The dark-skinned boy slapped him. "Are you stupid? Ask your parents to hide the soil lumps. Once you master the spell, you can go back and change them." "We'll ask our parents to hide the soil lumps when we get back." Young had a look of disgust on his face when he heard this. Even though he didn't know what cultivation was, it wasn't hard to tell that these words were definitely nonsense. In fact, there were quite a few smart people among the young people. However, most of them were young and had never studied. Their daily activities were limited to the size of a village. They were not like him. He had followed his father to hunt and set traps. He often went to the city to sell fur. A teacher from his family taught him some literature from time to time. His knowledge far surpassed his peers. Just as the young people were making a ruckus, they suddenly heard a sound. The sound seemed to have the ability to calm people's hearts. The Tao Palace quieted down. Then, a green smoke fell from the sky. A Taoist appeared. He looked like a sage. He wore a light purple Taoist robe and held a horsetail whisk. Beside him were 2 Taoist children who were holding enchanted artifacts. Yang's eyes widened. This was the first time he had seen such a divine spell. He was shocked. Not only him, but all the young people present were shocked. The Taoist sat down on the praying mat. He did not say much and began to preach. The Taoist did not talk about profound principles. He only talked about demons, and immortals. Yang listened as if he was intoxicated and infatuated. To a young man like him, the cultivators in the story who flew in the sky and burrowed into the ground to slay demons and exterminate devils were undoubtedly extremely attractive. But unknowingly, there was a feeling of qi in his chest. He did not know why, but he realized that the Taoists seemed to be smiling at him. The Taoist spoke for 3 days straight. Then, he picked out more than 10 people from the crowd, including Yang. The Taoist called them into the Tao Palace and said in a pleasant tone, "My name is Qi Liansher. From today onwards, I will guide you in your cultivation. Even though I am not your master, I can see that you have different talents. I will recommend you to the other Taoists in the sect to cultivate. You must all work hard." Yang understood. Those who learned well would have a good master. Those who did not learn well would not have a good master. At this moment, he didn't have the heart to resist, and he only wanted to learn Tao arts well so that he would be able to soar into the heavens and traverse the earth freely in the future. But in the beginning, he only learned some simple breathing techniques. There were people teaching them various languages, etiquette, and even astronomy and geography. After cultivating like this for about 3 years, Qi Liansher called them one by one in front of him to question them. Then he ordered people to send them to different places. For some reason, Yang was the last one to be called. When he was called to Qi Liansher, he was also nervous. Qi Liansher said in a gentle voice, "Tang Yang, 3 years ago when I preached, you were the first one to comprehend Qi sense. You have a good aptitude. Over the past 3 years, you've been diligent. Whether it's the art of inhaling and exhaling, you've learned better than others. Today, I'll send you out to learn Tao. Do you have any questions?" Tang Yang thought for a while, then raised his hand and bowed. He said, "Taoist, there is something I do not understand." Qi Liansher said, "Speak." Tang Yang said, "Why should we worship the Taoist master?" It was the first time Qi Liansher heard someone ask such a question. He said, "That is because the reason we can cultivate Tao is because we have received the Taoist master's grace. That is why we worship him." Tang Yang said, "But before I learned the Tao, I have not received the Taoist master's grace. So why should I worship him?" Qi Liansher smiled and said, "The food you and I eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we sleep in, and even the cows and horses we farm, everything in the world comes from the heaven and earth. The heaven and earth were created by Taoist master. Don't you think you've received his grace?" Tang Yang thought for a while and shook his head. No. Qi Liansher was not angry. He seemed to be interested to hear what he had to say. He said, "What's wrong?" Tang Yang said, "The food in our mouths, the clothes on our bodies, or what the Taoist master said, are not things that naturally come to my mouth and body. Take my family for example. Uncle works hard in farming, father hunts for a living, and us juniors can eat. Mother and sisters rear silkworms and weave cloth, and that is how we have the clothes on our bodies. These are all earned through hard work. What does it have to do with the Taoist master?" Qi Liansher stroked his beard and said, "Man must first help himself, and then the heavens will help him. You can understand this and not blindly follow the words of others. You do have some talent. However, things in this world are not naturally placed there." He pointed at the sky and then at the earth. He said, "From the sky to the stars, down to the living things in the world, most of them were created by the Taoist master. Even the reason you have hands and feet, and can eat and walk is because of the Taoist master. So how can you say that you have not received his grace?" Tang Yang thought for a while and said, "So, from young to old, from life to death, they are also created by the Taoist master?" Qi Liansher nodded and said, "That makes sense." Tang Yang asked, "If life is the Taoist master's grace, then what is death? Is it because the Taoist master is harsh?" Qi Liansher's eyes lit up slightly. He said, "The cycle of life and death is the principle of the world. As I said before, if you don't find ways to get food and clothing, then it is naturally impossible for your family to have more. If you are afraid of death, then you should find ways to prolong life and avoid death." Tang Yang said, "How can I prolong life and avoid death?" Qi Lianshi said, "Then I can only seek the Tao." Tang Yang said, "If that kid seeks the Tao, can he personally ask the Taoist master for more in the future?" Qi Lianshi laughed and said, "Then you have to cultivate well. Being weak won't do. Perhaps one day, you will really have the fate to ask the Taoist master." After a round of questioning, Tang Yang bowed respectfully and retreated. Qi Lianshi thought for a long time and said, "This kid's mind is jumpy. His aptitude is outstanding and he is also bold. If he is apprenticed to a mediocre teacher, I am afraid that it will delay him. Maybe there is only one person in the sect who can teach him." He took the brush and moved it as if it was flying. In an instant, he wrote a letter and handed it to the boy beside him. He said, "Send this letter to Elder Meng Hu. Tell him that I found him a good disciple." The boy bowed and left to carry out the order. Qi Lianshi stroked his beard and smiled. He thought that Tang Yang would definitely thank him properly in the future when he succeeded in learning the Tao. Translator, Zefizi Editor, Dio Quinn. Chapter 2355. At night, it was raining cats and dogs. 5 Taoists wearing bamboo hats walked along the muddy mountain path, but each of them had a layer of white light floating around them. When the rain came, it was all repelled. When they walked, their footsteps were extremely fast. Their silhouettes could be seen from afar, but in the blink of an eye, they were already near. Amidst the lightning and thunder, the silhouette of an ancient temple appeared. One of the Taoists looked up and pointed, "Eldest senior brother, there's a temple here." Another person said, "Eldest senior brother, we've been trekking in the wilderness for more than 100 days. It's rare to have a temple here. Why don't we go in and rest and meditate?" The person who was addressed as eldest senior brother looked up and said in a deep voice, "Okay." The 5 of them walked along the mountain path, and in just a few flashes, they arrived in front of the temple. Everyone looked at it. The steps here were smooth, without any moss, weeds, or withered leaves. The eaves and tiles were clean, and it was obvious that people often cleaned it. It didn't look like a temple in a barren mountain. The leading Taoist said, "Be careful." The other 4 people responded. They were all cultivators, and they had seen all kinds of strange things. Even with the abnormality in front of them, they were still calm. The leading Taoist tried to ask a few questions, but no one responded. So he went up to the temple door and looked around. Seeing that there was nothing strange inside, he walked in. Everyone looked around. The temple was quite big, and it was divided into 2 halls. The bricks and pillars were clean. The front hall was empty, and there were more than 10 praying mats on the left and right. The back hall was covered by a curtain, and there was an offering table. There was no statue on it, only a dozen tablets. A Taoist entered the back hall and looked around. He turned back and said, "Eldest senior brother, the back hall enshrines the tablets of the Taoist master. It seems like it's a temple set up by our fellow cultivators." The leading Taoist said with a serious expression, "So it's a place to enshrine the Taoist master. As cultivators, since we're passing by, we have to pay our respects." The 5 of them entered the back hall and were about to burn incense to pay their respects. But when one of them glanced at the other tablets, his expression changed and he said, "Senior brother, there's something wrong with the tablets below." The leader of the Taoists took a closer look and frowned. If it was a proper altar, then there should be the Taoist master enshrining the Taoist master, and then there should be the creator Yuan Zun. But because the realms were different, the offerings were also different. Other than the tablets of the Taoist master, and the Taoist master enshrined the tablets. This was where the Yu Huan heavens used to be, and the person they were worshipping was Fu Qingming, the human Tao Yuan venerate. However, they couldn't understand the honorific name worshipped here. If they stared at it for a long time, they would feel dizzy. This undoubtedly meant that this Yuan venerate was a demon. A Taoist said with an and said, and a and on, and said, "Taoist and a deist master." He took a few steps forward and was about to take the tablets away. Suddenly, someone coughed and said, "You guys, you can't touch the tablets above." Everyone was shocked. They turned around and saw an old man had appeared there. He was less than 3 feet tall, and his snow-white beard dragged on the ground. He held a wooden crutch in his hand. The Taoist put his hand on the hilt of his sword and said with hatred, "Monster!" The leading Taoist pressed his hand down and said, "Wait." The other party appeared without a sound. It was obvious that his cultivation was higher than theirs, and they didn't know if he had help. Slaying demons needed to be done at the right time. It was not wise to act rashly. Besides, the other party's intentions were unknown, so they had to get to the bottom of it before they acted. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I'm Jiang Jiao, and these are my junior brothers from the same sect. We're all disciples of White Han Sword Sect. We're on our way to the Sword Conference of Lesser Clear Sect, and we're passing by this place. If we've disturbed you, please don't blame us." When the old man heard the name of Lesser Clear Sect mentioned, he also revealed a look of respect. Even though it was only the Lesser Clear Sect, and there were only a dozen or so of them, they were all disciples sent from their own sect. None of them were to be trifled with. He said, "So it's a fellow Taoist from White Han Sword Sect. I'm Qing Lingwang, and I've gained the trust of my clansmen, so I've become the guardian of this temple." As he spoke, he cupped his hands and paused for a moment, then continued, "I've also heard about this sword conference, but seeing that your Taoist actions aren't simple, it shouldn't be difficult for you to fly there. Why don't you fly there?" Jiang Jiao said, "That has nothing to do with you, fellow Taoist. The swordsmanship of White Han Sword Sect was about using the sword with devotion and treating the sword with sincerity. This trip to the sword conference was precisely to use the path of sincerity. As long as they completed this path, their qi and spirit would be elevated to a whole new level, and this would be very beneficial for them to discuss swordsmanship with their fellow Taoists." Qing Lingwang said, "I don't have the mood to bother too much with the matters of your esteemed sect, but this place is the place where my clansmen worship, and it's usually very quiet. Occasionally, when fellow Taoists pass by to rest, we won't chase them away, but you want to destroy the memorial tablet that I worship. What's the logic behind this?" The tall and sturdy Taoist from before laughed coldly, took a step forward and said, "How can the memorial tablet of the Tao Master be worshipped by demons and devils? Isn't this disrespect to the Tao Master?" The old man chuckled and said, "These words don't make sense. Let me ask you, under the heavenly Tao all living beings are equal, so why is it that you cultivators of the human Tao can worship him, but we can't?" Another Taoist said in a deep voice, "If you want to worship the demon Yuan Zun, we'll naturally ignore you. The Tao Master achieved Tao as a human, and has nothing to do with you demons and devils." Qing Lingwang shook his head and said, "That's not right. The Tao Master is clearly not a human, so why do you say that he is a human?" The tall and sturdy Taoist said angrily, "Nonsense." Jiang Jiao took a deep breath and reached for his sword and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you going to debate with us here today? Then forgive me, we can only discuss Tao with swords. Is the Tao Master a human, or is he not?" This seemed like a simple question, but it was very important to the human Tao and the demons and devils. The Tao Master was the great Tao, and at the same time, he was the human side of the great Tao. However, whether this human was a human, and which side he stood on, was something that had to be clarified. If the Tao Master was a person of the human Tao, then it meant that the demons and devils would never be able to rise again. However, if the Tao Master was not a human, then the human Tao had no advantage. Especially now that there was a rumor that the human Tao would decline in the next era, and the demons and devils would replace it, the cultivators of the human Tao had to maintain this status. Here, the human Tao had an advantage, because the Tao Master was originally the great virtue of the human Tao, and he became the supreme Tao Master after expelling the spirit of creation. In order to win back, the demons and devils thought that the Tao Master was the Tao, and he saw all living beings as equal, and he had no likes or dislikes. Even if the real situation was not like this, they had to think so, and there was some truth to this. All of this was because under the great Tao, all living beings were the same. However, once the great Tao manifested as a human, and they had their own emotions, they might be biased, and the situation would be very different. Even though this was only a guess, both sides had to fight for this status. Otherwise, if even the heavenly Tao did not approve of you, then what was the point of cultivating? He would not be able to overcome the barrier of his state of mind. Zhang Yan had recognized this problem before he became a Tao Lord. If the path he took back then was completely according to the Great Tao, then he himself would be the puppet of the Great Tao, and he would not be able to act on his own. It was just that after he appeared, the Great Tao made up for the variable, but in reality he was still bound by the Great Tao. Therefore, the path he chose was the path of transcendence. The Great Tao was merely a stepping stone for him to improve, a temporary place to stay, and when the time came he would abandon it and leave. Jiang Jiao knew that this was a matter that could not be resolved through debate. In the end, he would still have to use force to resolve it. He thought to himself, looks like I'll have to vent my energy and spirit in the sword discussion meet first here. However, just as he was about to draw his sword, Qing Lingweng's expression changed, and he turned into a wisp of smoke and fled. In the next moment, a sword chi swept across the sky and sliced the entire temple in half. Jiang Jiao unconsciously took 2 steps away from the sword mark, and a shocked expression appeared on his face. He could sense that this sword did not slash the temple, but the entire mountain under his feet. Now, the entire mountain had been sliced open by this sword. There was a flash of light outside, and then a Taoist with a cold expression walked in. He glanced at Jiang Jiao and the others and said, "Are you from Baihan Sword Sect?" Jiang Jiao cupped his fist and said, "Yes, I am. May I ask for fellow Taoist's name?" The Taoist returned the greeting and said, "I am Shirhan of Shaoqing Sect. The sect master has foreseen that there will be obstacles on your way, so he specially ordered me to come and receive you." A wisp of smoke rose up, and Qing Lingweng appeared once again. He appeared with an unpleasant expression on his face. He looked at the sacrificial table and discovered that the tablet of Yuan Zun had already been sliced in half. He pointed at Shirhan and said with extreme shock and anger, "How dare you destroy Yuan Zun's tablet?" Shirhan's expression did not change, and he said indifferently, "So what if I've sliced it? If that Yuan Zun you speak of is not satisfied, then feel free to come to my Shaoqing sect." He turned his head around and said to Jiang Jiao and the others, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me." After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked out. The tall and sturdy Taoist suddenly pointed at Qing Lingweng and said, "Fellow Taoist, are we just going to ignore that demon?" Shirhan did not pay any attention to him, and his feet did not stop. In a flash, he had already walked out. The tall and sturdy Taoist still wanted to say something, but Jiang Jiao patted his shoulder, shook his head, and said, "This demon is already dead." As he spoke, he led the others out. Qing Lingweng watched the crowd leave, and he did not move an inch. After a moment, a sword mark appeared between his brows, and his whole body crumbled into dust. He was the incarnation of the mountain spirit, and just now, a sword had already cut off his root, and there was no longer any chance of survival. Jiang Jiao came outside and saw Shirhan standing there. He said, "I have already removed the obstacles for you. Since your sect has its own rules, you may proceed on your own." At this moment, the tall and sturdy Taoist suddenly took a step forward and cupped his hands together. "Fellow Taoist Shir, just now, I believe you have heard our conversation with that demon. Regarding whether the Taoist master is a human or not, what do you think?" Shirhan said indifferently, "Demons and other races, everyone has the right to punish them. If he has a different opinion from me, I can just kill him with my sword. There is no need to talk so much with him." The tall and sturdy Taoist frowned and said, "How can logic be debated like this?" Shirhan glanced at him and said, "Logic? The sword in our hands is the logic, and the heart is inside, not outside. Don't seek for yourself, but talk about the heavenly Tao. Isn't that laughable? There is still a long way to go. Take care of yourselves." As he finished speaking, a sword ray soared into the sky, flashed once in the sky, and disappeared. Jiang Jiao realized that the rain had stopped, and he looked at the boundless sky and said firmly, "Fellow junior brothers, let's go. There is still a long way to go, and it is waiting for me to go." Chapter 2356. Mystical Void Realm. Bai Wei stood in the grandest Dharma pagoda. Below him were believers worshipping towards the sky. Auspicious clouds and golden lotuses appeared continuously, and the surrounding altars were filled with fragrance and petals dancing in the air. He had not fought with the human Tao for many years, and the number of believers in his subordinates had increased. Sometimes, his disciples would also suggest to him that the world was infinite, so why must he fight with the human Tao? Wouldn't it be better if they had nothing to do with each other? He sighed. There were some things that had to be fought. As long as they were demons and other worldlings, then the human Tao would not let them go. If they did not fight back, then they could only sit and wait for death. Even if they really gave up on this idea, the human Tao would not believe them. Because if he put himself in their shoes, if the human Tao was in his position, it would not stop just like that. He withdrew his gaze and turned around. Lu Li and Chen Luo were standing behind him at the moment. Ever since the Path Master took control of the Great Path had re-established its order. Now, it was much easier to obtain UNU than before. It was no longer like before when it needed to be triggered by the Fate Master. With his hard work, the two of them were also restored. If it were not for the human Tao's obstruction, he might have restored all the Khanate demons. Thinking of this, he sighed inwardly. There was a rumor in the human Tao domain that the demons and other worldlings would rise in the next era. However, the problem was that after Bu Su Tian's change, there would be such a change in the next era. There was no conclusion yet. Even so, there was still a long way to go. Right now, the human Tao was like the sun in the sky. It was the time when it was at its strongest. Such a rumor would only cause the human Tao to think of ways to eliminate this hidden danger in advance. And his action of restoring the same kind seemed to prove this point. But even though he knew this, he had to do it. Otherwise, it would be even more difficult to deal with this situation. He shook his head and collected his thoughts. He took a few steps forward and arrived at the main hall of the pagoda. He stood in front of a huge stone screen. After waiting for a moment, he saw light and shadow soar from inside. Ling Jun and Deng Zhang's silhouettes appeared from inside. Bai Wei cupped his fists and said, "Welcome." Lu Li and Chen Luo bowed as well. Ever since the three of them knew that they had no hope of winning against their enemy, they had been waiting for the arrival of the next era and had not come into contact with each other for a long time. But the current grim situation had forced them to gather together once again. After Bai Wei greeted the two of them, he said, "Gentlemen, I won't waste time on unnecessary words." Ever since the Path Master took over the Great Path, the situation has changed greatly from before. The Path Master comes from the human path, and even though he is impartial, it will be difficult for him to convince the hearts of his subordinates. At this moment, the human path is overbearing and sees us as a great enemy. If we don't join forces again, once the human path has made up its mind, we will probably be defeated one by one. Deng Zhang said expressionlessly, "That makes sense." The path of emotionlessness was to give up everything for the sake of the Great Tao, and finally merge with the Great Tao. Perhaps it was this kind of person who was most compatible with the Heavenly Tao. However, now that the Great Tao had transformed into a person and the Heavenly Tao had feelings, how could he be emotionless? This caused his own Taoist heart to waver, especially when many of his younger disciples' states of mind were shattered. Fortunately, this did not affect his cultivation. What he cultivated was ultimately his own, and he would not lose it because of a change in his state of mind. But if he did not think of a way to solve this problem, then not only his disciples, but he himself would not be able to reach the upper realm. On the surface, Ling Jun did not seem to care much. He said, "Oh? Is the situation that critical?" The situation on the extraterrestrial demons' side was actually fine. They were isolated from the anti-heaven and earth, so they could explain the changes in the outside world however they wanted. Moreover, after the Demon Master's discussion, they believed that Demon Master Qizhou was one of the Path Master's incarnations. In fact, they themselves could not confirm this, but they had to say so to their subordinates. Now that they had no conflict with the human path, as long as they hid in the anti-heaven and earth and did not come out, no one would actively refute them. Bai Wei said, "Although your side is in the anti-heaven and earth, it does not mean that you are free of worries. If I am not wrong, after that indescribable thing and spiritual opportunity fused for a long time, the anti-heaven and earth could no longer stop the human path cultivators from entering. If not for me and fellow Taoist Deng holding them back, I am afraid that the human path will first deal with your side. Ling Jun smiled. That is why I am willing to come here today. Bai Wei looked at the two of them and said in a low voice, both of you, the fact that the Path Master achieved Tao as a human can be concealed, but the real problem is that there is no way for us to advance. If we do not break this shackle, we will never be able to defeat the human path. Ling Jun and Deng Zhang were silent. Bai Wei had indeed hit the nail on the head. True yang cultivators could make all things in the world benefit themselves in their own quarters, so it was not difficult for them to change the memories of others. But when it came to the Pathmaster, this ability was obviously useless. Fortunately, they could intercept all news from the outside in their own quarters, so they could temporarily hide this matter and not let their subordinates feel fear and despair. But other than this, there was an even bigger problem. From what they knew, all the Grand Supremes and great virtues seemed to be from the human path, and this even shook their own confidence. Therefore, they eagerly hoped that a powerhouse would appear among the beast race. Even if it was not a great virtue, it would be good if it was just a Grand Supremes. This would at least prove that they, the beast race, could also achieve transcendence from the mortal world. Ling Jun knew that they had now entered the main topic and said, fellow Taoist Bai Wei has called us here today, so you must have a way to deal with this matter. Can you tell us? A strange look appeared in Bai Wei's eyes as he said, speaking of which, there is actually a powerhouse among us demons and beast race. Ling Jun's heart skipped a beat and he said, oh? I have never heard of this. May I know who it is? Deng Zhang thought about it, and he already had some guesses in his heart. Bai Wei said, I wonder if the two of you have heard of the legend of the Dragon Ancestor? The Dragon Ancestor? Ling Jun had a look of realization. According to legend, all the true dragons in the universe had an ancestral source, and this was the Dragon Ancestor. And the Dragon Ancestor's consciousness was reflected in the universe, and just now, the Dragon Ancestor had manifested. Deng Zhang said, fellow Taoist is indeed talking about this one. However, it is not without reason that all the powerhouses in the world are human path cultivators. Even if the Dragon Ancestor really exists, I'm afraid he is also feared by those human path powerhouses. Of course, Bai Wei understood what he meant. All the Grand Supremes and great virtue came from human path, but the Dragon Ancestor was a beast race. That meant that he was surrounded by enemies, and he might have already been taken care of by those human path powerhouses. He said, I once heard that after the Tao Master chased away the spirit of creation, all the almighties that had disappeared in the past came back. If that is the case, then this Dragon Ancestor might be among them. Even if my judgment is wrong, if this Almighty had left a trace of mana in Busu Tian, then it is the same to me whether he is dead or not. Just like how the true Yang cultivators still existed after they were defeated and killed, as long as some of the mana of the Spirit Refinement Grand Supremes remained, they might be able to see this person. Ling Jun said, but we know nothing about the Dragon Ancestor. Even if we can really find this person, he might not help us. Bai Wei smiled and said, no, actually, this person might have interacted with us a long time ago. Ling Jun showed some seriousness and said, fellow Taoist, why do you say so? Bai Wei said, the change in Busu Tian back then might have something to do with the Dragon Ancestor, or it might have been caused by this person. His goal might be to let us replace the human path. Back then, Busu Tian was occupied by the human path, but suddenly, there was a huge change that caused the human path Yuan Zun to have no choice but to leave Busu Tian. He even lost his Tao treasure, and in the end, the Khanate demons were able to occupy this place. But in reality, Bai Wei, Lu Li, and the others also did not know what happened. At that time, they were completely taken advantage of, and they did not understand the matter until later. But now, after knowing about the battle between the spirit of creation and the various Vedantas, and recalling the scene back then, he suspected that it might be because of this person. Previously, he had done a detailed investigation, and the more he delved into it, the more he felt that this matter might be true. He told them the clues he found and his own judgment one by one. Ling Jun and Deng Zhang thought for a while and felt that even if there were some differences between this matter and Bai Wei's deduction, it probably had something to do with this person. One must know that in Busu Tian back then, there were a total of 12 human path Yuan Zun in charge. Other than the Spirit Refinement Grand Supremes, they really could not think of anyone else who could do this and at the same time, not letting anyone know the reason. Deng Zhang said, "Since you mentioned this, then you must have a way to find this dragon ancestor?" Bai Wei said, "In the various worlds, there are many real dragons. Since they have the bloodline of the dragon ancestor, then we might be able to use their power to implicate the dragon ancestor. But this matter is not small, and there are not many lands involved. If it is just me, I don't think I can do it. I need all of you to work together. What do you think?" The real dragons themselves could be counted as demons, but they would never be companions with other demons. In addition, they were born strong, so it was not easy to capture them. If there was a big commotion, they might be discovered by the human path. Therefore, they had to do it themselves. Just now, so that the information would not be leaked. Deng Zhang did not think too much. As long as it could resist the pressure of the human path, he was willing to try. He said, "The heartless path agrees to this." Bai Wei looked at Ling Jun and said, "My friend Ling Jun, what do you say?" Ling Jun considered the pros and cons of this. The dragon ancestor was not an extraterrestrial demon, nor was he an innate demon. Therefore, he was not on the same side as Bai Wei and the others. However, since he was born of a different race, he might really be able to help them solve the current predicament. At the very least, it could prove that different races could achieve Tao. After he used his spirit to communicate with the other demon masters, he replied readily, "We agree to this." Chapter 2357. Phoenix Cry Gorge. Wing Sky Continent. In the Immortals Cave in the back mountain of the Clear Feather Sect, Tao Zhenhong sat cross-legged on a prayer mat, surrounded by dense clear qi. Suddenly his aura began to fluctuate, and the qi mist began to rise up, then gradually transformed into a small dragon that was no more than a foot long. A moment later, the dragon transformed from pure qi into corporeal flesh and blood, complete with horns and claws and scales. Its eyes widened, and a vicious expression could be seen on its face. Its long body trembled, and it let out a draconic roar. Then it twisted its body and began to pace back and forth in the spacious Immortals Cave. Occasionally, it would let out a low growl, which caused many of the demonic dragons and other bizarre creatures to curl up and tremble. However, the creatures that could be placed in this cave abode were not simple either. They either had the ability to discern words and expressions, or they had sharp senses. After experiencing the initial fear, they realized that this dragon seemed to be strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Other than being able to roar a few times, it did not have any other abilities. Thus, they began to become bolder, and some even took the initiative to go forward to test it. The little dragon seemed to have been provoked, as if its dignity had been violated. It flew into a rage, and its body suddenly transformed into a bolt of lightning that circled the Immortals Cave. When the lightning faded away, the rumbling of thunder filled the air, and many of the creatures shrank back, shrieking in pain. However, the little dragon also seemed dispirited and listless. Its head drooped down, and it lay on all fours, panting. Seeing this, Tao Zhenhong waved his hand and took back the little dragon. Then he pointed with his finger, and it turned into a cloud of smoke again. Then, it fell back into the clear qi behind him. Nothing was left. He closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then he said, "It's still not enough." When he had first arrived in the mountain and sea realm, he had used the origin dragon to create quite a few demonic dragons, which had helped the disciples of the various sects and clans. Later, his cultivation base had advanced, and he hadn't stopped. He had created even more bizarre creatures, and now he was studying how to create a true dragon. He stood up from the meditation cushion, pushed open the door to the estate, and stepped into a jade wall. Instantly, the scenery before his eyes changed, and he'd arrived at the small world he'd opened up. The winged beings in the sky flapped their wings and roamed about, The beasts on the ground gathered and galloped about, the fish in the water leaped about, and countless living beings thrived here. Compared to the other small worlds of the same generation, this place was filled with exuberant vitality. All the living beings here, from the sky to the ground, from the big to the small, were all created by him. Just like the Shaoqing sect's sword technique, he sought the Tao from the sword. He sought the Tao from the living beings. In his opinion, the spirits of creation could also be considered a special kind of living being. In fact, at the last moment, after the spirit of creation filled in the human heart, it could indeed be considered a living being. With a thought, he appeared above the continent in an instant. There were countless monsters floating in the clouds here. Their figures were almost the same as the continent, but he'd created them by imitating the void living beings. Not only did they look huge, but their battle prowess was also very impressive. If he encountered an enemy, he could release the living beings in this world to help him in battle with a thought. He stopped here for a moment, and his figure shifted again. This time, he arrived at a higher level. A large dragon corpse of unknown length was floating here. A single scale on its body was comparable to those monsters in the clouds just now. This was a true dragon that had completely grown up. It was rare even in the myriad of worlds, and its strength when it was alive was not simple. At the very least, it had stood at the peak of a world. In terms of pure cultivation, it was not far off from him. However, the death of this dragon had nothing to do with him. When he found it, it was already a corpse. His body flickered as he appeared on the head of the true dragon, where he placed his finger on its forehead. After studying it for a moment, he frowned and thought to himself, "Strange. Very strange. Could it be that it really is the case?" His goal in creating the true dragon was to gain enlightenment of profound truths from it. That way, he would be able to perfect his own magic, and then use the origin jade to reach the higher realm. He had acquired the origin jade not too long ago, and it was no longer a hindrance to him. However, only people with the limited amount of cultivation base could acquire it. The Pure Feather sect was one of the great sects of the mountain and sea realm, and as the sect leader, acquiring one wasn't a difficult task. However, after acquiring the true dragon, the more he delved into it, the more questions he found. In fact, he even came up with some unimaginable conclusions. It was not something that could be resolved behind closed doors. He would have to seek guidance from someone, and ideally, an almighty higher realm expert. After a long moment of thought, he emerged from the minor world, called out to his disciples, and gave them a few instructions. Then he left the Pure Feather sect, and headed toward the heaven beyond the heavens. After traveling for some time, he relied on his spiritual awareness to come to a stop. Clasping his hands in greeting, he said, "Is the Grand Exalted One present?" Tao Zhenhong of the Pure Feather sect requests an audience. Even as the words left his mouth, a Tao palace appeared in front of him, and a voice spoke out from within. "Fellow Taoist, please come in." Tao Zhenhong entered the palace and walked up to a cloud platform. Seeing Dan Yi's incarnation sitting there, he clasped his hands in greeting and said, "Grand Exalted One offers greetings." Danny said, "There's no need to stand on ceremony. Since you're here, there's no need for formalities. Fellow Taoist, please sit down and talk." Tao Zhenhong was the type of person who was most willing to communicate with lower-level cultivators of the mortal Tao. He had always been worried about the difficulties the mortal Tao would encounter in the next era. In order to help the mortal Tao as much as possible, he had sent word to many cultivators with potential, telling them that if they encountered any problems they couldn't solve themselves, they could come to him for guidance. Tao Zhenhong said, "Excuse me," and sat down in front of the cloud platform. Danny said, "Fellow Taoist, is there something you want to ask me?" As a God refinement almighty being, he could know everything in the world with just a thought. However, ever since he achieved his Tao, he had taken the initiative to hide this ability and never tried to pry into people's hearts. Tao Zhenhong said, "I'm here today to ask the Grand Exalted One about the Dragon Ancestor." Danny said, "The Dragon Ancestor? Fellow Taoist, are you trying to seek the Tao through the Dragon Ancestor? Although that is also a Tao path, fellow Taoist is a human cultivator. If you use this method to reach the upper realm, aren't you afraid of going astray? Tao Zhenhong clasped his hands and said, I have some shallow opinions. If there are any mistakes, please correct me, Grand Exalted One. Danny nodded and said, Please speak, fellow Taoist. Tao Zhenhong said, I have done a detailed investigation in the myriad heavens and realms. Privately, I think that while the true dragon can be called a different kind, the dragon ancestor might not be a different kind. Dan Yi was a little surprised, but then he showed a hint of admiration and said, Fellow Taoist, to be able to see this step, it is enough to show that you are fated with the upper realm. Even some true Yang Almighty beings might not be able to see the clues here, and Tao Zhenhong could see this with his mortal body. Such a situation would not have happened in the past, but after Zhang Yan enlightened all living beings with the God refinement of all beings, some people gained more insights, and he was one of them. After he sighed, he said, Fellow Taoist, do you know about the essence of creation? Tao Zhenhong said, I know a little. He knew that Bu Shutian was once a part of the essence of creation, and that the spirit of creation that made the Badantines helpless came from it, but that was all. These things were only given to them by Dan Yi when he watched the battle between the Badantines and the spirit of creation, so that they could understand the cause and effect. However, it was naturally impossible to know exactly what sort of profundities the creation essence possessed and where it came from. Tao Zhenhong did not intend to inquire about it. He felt that some things would be known when he reached a certain realm. Searching for it now would only add to his troubles. This choice was the right one. Because under the God refinement of all beings, as long as his Tao heart did not give up, some things would be reflected on their own even if he did not take the initiative to find them. Dan Yi explained a little here and said, The essence of creation is the manifestation of Tao. It is self-satisfied and has no beginning and end. Perhaps only the Taoist master can understand its mystery. Before this thing was broken, the Badantines' Tao was comprehended from it. After this thing was broken, not only did a part of it become the spirit of creation, but it also gave birth to places like Bu Shutian. At this point he sighed slightly. When the spirit of creation was born, almost all the Badantines chose to fight against it, but only one did not do so. Instead, he transformed his human body into a demon body in an attempt to draw out another Tao art so that he could grasp it. Tao Zhenhong looked over and said, Is this Badantine the dragon ancestor? Danny nodded and said, Yes. When Bu Shutian fell, he also had some doubts. The human Tao was clearly strong, so why was it driven out of Bu Shutian without any warning? He also wanted to find out the real reason for this. He only learned everything after he had a wily encounter with several Badantines from Bu Shutian. Before the spirit of creation was broken, all the Badantines were born in the human Tao, but after achieving the Tao, whether or not they still considered themselves human depended on how they viewed the matter. And this Badantine completely denied the human Tao body. If that was all, it would be fine, but this person took advantage of the time when the Badantines were restrained to use his own body as a seal and reflected it into the dragon ancestor's body in Bu Shutian. He evolved many real dragons and wanted to seize the power of the Tao. Perhaps because it happened in a hurry, the creation Pauline that this person held was accidentally lost, causing him to be lost in the long river of the Tao. But his wily did not completely dissipate and still lingered in the silence, trying to complete this matter. It was just that he was blocked by the patriarch's wily, so he could not achieve his wish. It was also a coincidence that later on, Taoist 1K tried to break through the barrier and transcend the world. Originally, whether it was a success or failure, it was only his matter, but he retreated. The whaley left by the Badantines saw the flaw and used it to resonate with the many real dragons in Bu Shutian. From then on, it seeped in and wanted to trigger the Tao of the different species so that it could have a replacement and return. This caused the turmoil later on. Because there were some things here that involved the changes of the Badantines' Tao, Dan Yi could not explain everything clearly, so he only picked some important ones and gave a general explanation. Tao Zhenhong's main purpose of finding this place was to confirm his own deduction. Now that he knew the truth matched with the theory in his heart, he suddenly felt that the Tao that originally existed in his heart was connected. He could not help but smile and stood up, bowed and said, Thank you for clearing up my doubts, Supreme One. Please remember this book's domain name. 9 Heavens Shenhuang. Chapter 2358. Beneath the Abyss, the Secret Palace of the Netherworld Spring Sect. Yuan Hongyang was immersed in a long river, rising and falling, circling and winding, advancing and stopping like a dream, with no laws of the world to speak of. The water of this long river was originally turbid, as if it was immersed in the filth of the world. However, as his consciousness gradually came to an understanding, the turbidity continued to fade, turning into a glass-like clarity, as if all the filth in the world had been washed away. At this moment, he had already arrived at the deepest part of the Netherworld River, which meant that he had already straightened out his Tao, from essence to Qi, and from Qi to spirit. He had completely understood it. At this moment, he opened his eyes and saw that not far from him, there were a few silhouettes that appeared. These were the Qi dynamics left behind by the previous generation's sect leaders. Although these people's skills were far from his, they could all be considered seniors and ancestors, so he also cupped his hands in greeting. However, next he solemnly cupped his hands in greeting to one of them. That person nodded and moved to the side, but another path appeared behind him and said, "Hongyang, you can continue forward." Yuan Hongyang bowed again and walked along the path. Although he was walking forward, he felt that he was going back, and in the end, it was as if he had returned to the beginning. He looked back and there was nothing there. At this moment, he seemed to have sensed something, and when he turned again, he saw a Taoist standing there, illusory and indistinct. He seemed to be far away, yet close at the same time. He immediately recognized the other party's identity, and with a solemn expression he bowed and said, "Disciple Yuan Hongyang pays respect to the Patriarch." Patriarch Ling Yu said, "Since you're already here, you only need to refine the primordial jade to achieve true yang. However, are you willing to place your consciousness here?" When Yuan Hongyang arrived here, there were inexplicably many things that he didn't know before in his memories. The Netherworld River was connected to the divine Qi, and he could place a part of his consciousness and spirit here. As long as the Patriarch Wei was still here, no matter how strong the enemy he encountered outside, as long as his consciousness was not destroyed, he could be reborn in the Netherworld River. This was even more powerful than depositing one's Yuan Qi ocean. As long as the descendants of Ancestor Ling Yu had reached the true Yang realm, they could make such a choice. However, he was the only one who had come here. However, everything in the world had its pros and cons. If he didn't occupy the Yuan Qi Sea, then even after reaching true Yang, his cultivation would never be able to progress. This was not something he wanted to see. He said bluntly, "Ancestral Master, this disciple seeks to transcend." Since Taoist Master has already opened up the path ahead and can reach the heavens as a human, this disciple is willing to give it a try. Ancestor Ling Yu said, "Since that's what you want, I can fulfill your wish." As soon as Yuan Hongyang heard this, he felt that his opportunity had arrived. With a thought, the mysterious stone appeared out of thin air. With another revolution, he felt himself sinking into a ball of bright light. After a very long time, his consciousness returned to his body once more, and he discovered that he was no longer in the Nether River. Instead, he was sitting upright in his cave, but compared to before he went into closed-door cultivation, he had undergone a tremendous change. An even greater change occurred above the Netherworld River. This item was originally the Nether Spring Sect's ultimate treasure. Not only could it be used to fight enemies, but it could also be used to assist in cultivation. It was extremely compatible with one's cultivation method. It was just that the past sect masters had their aura immersed in it, and there was even a trace of ancestral Master Ling Yu's aura remaining in it. However, it was impossible to see it without a certain level of cultivation. Because of this item had never truly belonged to him. Whoever sat on the position of sect master of the Nether Spring Sect could use this item. However, just now, Ancestral Master Ling Yu had washed away the impurities in it, and even he himself had withdrawn from it. Thus, he obtained the true authority to use this item. These were not the only benefits. After he reached true Yang, he would definitely be able to create clones, and these clones would similarly improve their cultivation. If he didn't deal with them, they might even replace his original body. Originally, he had to deal with these himself, but perhaps because he had met the ancestral master just now, all his clones had landed in the Nether River. There was no need for him to kill them one by one. Later, he only had to turn the river to gradually wear them down and turn them into nutrients for the Nether River. Since he had succeeded, he waved his sleeve and went outside. The elder on duty outside saw some commotion in the secret cave and hurriedly rushed over to take a look. However, he saw Yuan Hongyang's figure walking out. The aura that was originally as deep as the Nether River on his body had calmly disappeared. Instead, it was ethereal, like the vast blue sky. The elder on duty was stunned at first, and then said joyfully, "Sect Master, have you succeeded and come out of seclusion?" Yuan Hongyang nodded. "Thank you, Elder Cheng." The elder on duty hurriedly said, "Now that Sect Master has come out of seclusion, the Nether Spring sect will not lose to the Qinsong and Shaoqing sects." Previously, the Qinsong and Shaoqing sects' sect masters had come out of seclusion one after another, and both sects had true yang powerhouses keeping watch. As one of the three major sects, the Nether Spring sect had not made any movements for a long time, but now, they had finally caught up. Yuan Hongyang shook his head. Compared to these two sects, the Nether Spring sect is still quite lacking. At this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of urgency in his heart, as if he could not ignore this matter anymore. He could not help but feel it was strange. The difference between the Nether Spring sect and the two sects was already there, and it was not something that could be resolved in a short time. There must be some other reason for him to suddenly have such a thought. He pondered for a while. There was something that he had originally planned to do, and since he had achieved true yang now, it was time for him to do it. Thus, he said, "Elder Cheng, please call Imo Ching over." The elder on duty, Daoren, acknowledged and left excitedly. Yuan Hongyang came to the hall and sat down. After a while, a young Taoist walked in and bowed, saying, "Sect Master wants to see me?" Yuan Hongyang said, "Come closer to me." The young Taoist acknowledged and stopped in front of him. Yuan Hongyang stretched out his hand and lightly patted his forehead. The young Taoist could not help but take a few steps back. His expression was first stunned, and then he revealed a look of confusion. Then the aura on his body fluctuated violently and only calmed down after a while. When he raised his head again, his long hair was already loose, and his gaze and aura were completely different from before. He bowed towards the seat and said, "Feng Haiyang greets senior brother. Thank you for helping me recover my memories." Yuan Hongyang smiled and said, "Junior brother, since you have returned, the successor of the Nether Spring sect will not lose to the Qinsong and Shaoqing sections." In his heart, he was very clear that since Sect Master Qin and Sect Master Yu had already become true Yang Masters, it was very likely that they would not be able to sit in the position of Sect Master for much longer. Next, they would pass their positions to Qi Yuntian and Qin Chenzi. The Nether Spring sect was one of the three major sects along with these two sections. Now that he had achieved true Yang, it was not very suitable for him to continue occupying this position. However, although the Nether Spring sect had many outstanding disciples, in his opinion, there was no one suitable to sit in this position. Most importantly, no matter whether it was Qi Yuntian or Qin Chenzi, they were already very famous when they were in the 9 continents. Thus, even if the successor of the Nether Spring sect could not compare to them in terms of reputation, his cultivation and spirit could not be too far behind. It was a pity that the heroes of the early years of the Nether Spring sect were almost all gone. There was almost no one who could compare to these two. However, Feng Haiyang was different. His predecessor could be considered to be of the same generation as these two successors. Although his cultivation was still at the Yuanying level, with the full support of the entire Nether Spring sect, it would not take long for him to catch up. After Yuan Hongyang passed away, he would definitely be able to replace him in guarding the sect. After Feng Haiyang was enlightened, although this body was mainly based on his original memory, he did not forget the memory that this body originally had. Yuan Hongyang had enlightened him originally because he wanted to pass the position of the next sect master to him. Although his cultivation was not very high, he did not feel that he was not suitable at all. he said calmly. Junior brother will not disappoint senior brother's expectations. Yuan Hongyang nodded and said, I am aware of junior brother's talent. However, your cultivation and spirit must catch up as soon as possible. Only then will you be able to convince the others. After giving detailed instructions, he distributed a strand of the Netherworld River to Feng Haiyang and ordered him to go cultivate. However, after doing this, he found that although the strange feeling in his heart had weakened a bit, it had not completely disappeared. There must be other things that had come true. He thought to himself, it seems that I need to check in the realm. True young cultivators all had their own residences. However, after Zhang Yan achieved true yang, he had already integrated the mountain and sea realm into his own residences. Therefore, he would not casually check in. With this thought, he stood up and went to the back of the palace. He bowed to the Tao Master's memorial tablet and explained the reason in his heart. Only then did he release his magic power to search for the laws of fate. In next to no time, he noticed an inkling. With a command in his heart, he'd already arrived at a place that was filled with turbidine energy, and there were countless devils floating indeterminately in the surroundings. This was the end of the Earth Abyss. In the eyes of the people of the realm, the Earth Abyss was infinite and could not be reached. However, for people like him who were not bound to the realm, this place was limited. He could sense that there was a gap here, and when he looked over, he saw an infant sleeping soundly. Its hands and feet were curled up, as if it were still in the womb. Based on his skills, he could tell at a glance what the infant was. It was a devil infant, which had been affected by the emotions of the world in the realm, and had thus manifested its spirituality. It was born because the spiritual energy of the mountain and sea realm had improved. Not only was the spiritual energy of the clear energy flourishing, but it was also the spiritual energy of the impure energy of the yin energy of a higher level. Because of that concentration of spiritual energy, it was only by chance that this object was born. If it could continue to grow, it was entirely possible that the entire Earth Abyss would develop its own consciousness. However, the conditions for that to happen were extremely stringent, and without careful guidance, it would be virtually impossible. Yuan Hongyang thought to himself, so that's what I sensed. If the spirit gate can prosper, it will all be because of this kid. He waved his sleeve, summoning the underworld river. Then, a wave swept up the devil infant, temporarily suppressing the turbid yin energy that had gathered on its body. Then, it was sent into the world to be reborn. Chapter 2359. Mountain and Sea Realm, Northern Heaven Frigid Abyss, Bright Nether Heavenly Lake. Two young cultivators walked out of an immortal's cave. One of them was called Duan Shizai, the other was Duan Yuda. They were twin brothers, both disciples of Yuan Zhangking. Although they looked very similar, their demeanor and temperament were completely different. Even if they stood next to each other, anyone familiar with them wouldn't be able to tell them apart. There was a faint hint of excitement in their expressions. Today, they were going to follow their master to Xinyuan Heaven to pay a visit to the ancestral master. After all, the founding ancestor of the Bright Nether clan was the master of the Grand Tao, and all the principles of the world and the rules of the universe were controlled by him. They were cultivators as well, so they were naturally unable to restrain their emotions when they found out about this. Duan Shizai was a lazy person, so he stood there unsteadily. He looked at the sun and said, "Second brother, how long do you think we should wait?" Duan Yuda said solemnly, "Eldest brother, it's not up to me to decide when to enter the Dusk River. Since Master told us to wait here, he must have his reasons." Duan Shizai said, "Waiting won't delay other matters. I got some good tea yesterday. Why don't I get someone to brew it for us brothers to enjoy it slowly?" Duan Yuda frowned. "Eldest brother, don't joke at a time like this." Duan Shizai laughed when he saw his reluctance. "Since second brother is unwilling, then forget it." Just then, a handsome boy ran over, panting. He bowed and said, "Two senior brothers, Shangjin just now sent a message saying that it's about time to go to the Dusk River." Duan Yuda looked at the boy and said, "Junior brother Qi, you're already panting after just 2 steps. How are you going to cultivate in the future?" You need to practice the breathing technique I taught you. The boy looked at his serious face and couldn't help but feel nervous. Yes, senior brother. Duan Shizai stroked the child's head and said, all right. Junior brother Chi is still young. Cultivation isn't something that can be accomplished in a day or two. Just take it slow. Duan Yuda said solemnly, you mustn't slack off in your cultivation. Big brother, you mustn't lead your junior brother astray. All right, it's all my fault. Duan Shizai chuckled and said, we should hurry up and leave. If we miss the time, we won't be able to reunite with Master. Duan Yuda said, elder brother is right. He took a step back. Elder brother, please go first. Duan Shizai shook his head helplessly. He waved his hand at the boy and soared into the sky. Duan Yuda followed closely behind him. 2 streams of stellar chi flew straight to the top of clear nether heavenly lake. When they arrived in the sky, they looked at the mirror-like surface of the lake and nodded to each other. Then, they flew into the lake one after another. In an instant, both of them felt as if they had broken through a barrier, and an incomparably vast world was revealed before them. They were standing on a high shore, and in front of them was a vast river that occupied most of their field of vision. In the distance, it seemed to be connected to the sky. Tens of thousands of waves surged, and the air swallowed the clouds. Duan Shizai said excitedly, the Dark River. This is the Dark River. This place was called the Dark River by cultivators. Legend had it that following this river would lead one straight to Shenyuan heaven and be enlightened by the Tao Master. However, without the guidance of the talisman, anyone could only come here once in their lifetime. This was their first time coming here. Looking at the magnificent scene in front of them, they were shocked for a long time. Duan Shizai couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Tens of thousands of immortal waves dissipate, thousands of lakes return spiritual light, the mysteries of heaven and earth are born, the book of heaven and earth. He looked back and forth and found that many cultivators were also fighting to cross the river. This was because this river not only reached the sky, but it also connected all the worlds in the heavens. Those who wandered here were all people who were looking for the laws of fate. However, if they didn't have great luck, they wouldn't be able to gain much. On the contrary, comprehending the laws here was much smoother than in the outside world. Duan Yuda glanced around and saw a WM boat anchored by the riverbank not far away. In front of the boat, there were a dozen black WMs pulling it. He pointed and said, teacher's boat is over there. Brother, let's hurry over there. We shouldn't let teacher wait for too long. Duan Shizai nodded repeatedly. It was difficult to fly above the dark river, so they walked quickly to the boat. At this moment, a child was waiting at the bow of the boat. It was Yuan Jingqing's child, Yuan Ping. Seeing the two, he bowed and said, greetings, senior brothers. Please come on board, master is in the cabin. The two boarded the boat, and after greeting Yuan Ping, they entered the cabin. Inside, they saw Yuan Jingqing in a black robe sitting on a praying mat with Lu Xuanji standing behind him. They quickly went up and greeted, Master. Then, they bowed to Lu Xuanji and said, Senior brother. Lu Xuanji also cupped his hands. Greetings, junior brothers. Yuan Jingqing glanced at the two. Since we're here, let's go. As soon as he gave the order, the dozen or so flood dragons in front of him let out a series of low roars and dragged the boat, breaking through the white gas waves and heading back to the source. The Duan brothers stood to the side obediently. Duan Shizai also subconsciously put away his lazy look, but his eyes still darted outside from time to time. Yuan Jingqing, on the other hand, closed his eyes and said nothing. Seeing that he didn't speak, the other disciples didn't dare to speak either. The cabin was extremely quiet, only the sound of the surging waves could be heard from time to time. After an unknown amount of time, the boat slowed down and came to a stop. Yuan Jingqing looked at the Duan brothers and said, This is the treasure spirit realm. It was created by Master's treasure spirit mountain river chi diagram. This is the only way to Shenyuan heaven. There are countless magical treasures inside, all of which have spiritual nature. Most of the laws of fate fall here. I remember that the two of you don't have a suitable magical treasure. You can go inside and choose one. Duan Shizai was overjoyed. "Thank you, master." He thought for a moment and asked, "What about eldest senior brother?" Lu Xuanji smiled. "Junior brother, have you forgotten that the Tao I cultivate doesn't need these things? You can go ahead." Duan Shizai patted his head. After bowing, he dragged his brothers down the boat excitedly. Yuan Jingqing sat motionless. At this moment, the clear spiritual qi in the cabin circulated, and Mountain River Child appeared. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Yuan Shang." Yuan Jingqing returned the greeting. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Mountain River Child said, "Since Yuan Shang is in the realm, why don't you enter the realm?" Yuan Jingqing said, "No need. I will wait here for my senior brothers. When they arrive, we will set off. There is no need to trouble fellow Taoist." Seeing that he was unwilling, Mountain River Child said a few more polite words and left. The Duan brothers wandered around the treasure spirit realm and quickly chose a suitable treasure. They returned to the boat but no longer sat idle like before. Instead, they communicated with the treasure spirits. Yuan Jingqing did not restrain them. After a while, Yuan Ping walked in and said, "Master, Wei Shang's boat is here." Yuan Jingqing stood up and said, "Come with me." Lu Xuanji and the Duan brothers hurriedly followed. Outside, everyone looked up and saw a dragon carp carrying a giant boat in the distance. Wei Zihong stood at the bow of the boat, and beside him were Fu Baoxing and Han Zwiqing. When the boat came closer, Yuan Jingqing cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, senior brothers." The three disciples beside him also followed and bowed. Wei Zihong returned the greeting with a smile. "Junior brother, sorry to keep you waiting." He looked at the Duan brothers and said, "Are these the new disciples you have accepted?" Their root vessels are extraordinary." Yuan Jingqing said, "Their cultivation is still shallow, they are not good enough." Wei Zihong laughed and said, "Don't be too harsh on me, junior brother." After chatting for a while, the brothers boarded the boat. Along the way, they met up with Jiang Zheng, who had come from another world on a boat. After passing through several worlds, they finally arrived at Xianyuan Heaven. The Xian River seemed to have reached its end. The Duan brothers saw a Tao palace emerge from afar and knew that this was where their founder lived. They couldn't help but feel excited. The group disembarked from the boat, with Jiang Zheng leading the way toward the Tao palace. Soon, they arrived at the bottom of the jade steps. Everyone looked up and saw Lu Yini standing on the steps in a plain Taoist robe with her hair tied up with a silver ring. Tian Kuan and the Wang sisters had arrived a step earlier than them. At this moment, they were standing together and looking at them with smiles on their faces. Behind them were Zhua Hanzhang, Lin Sixue, and the other disciples who had regained their memories. Jiang Zheng felt sentimental and thought to himself, "How many years has it been? My fellow disciples of the clear darkness lineage are finally reunited here." He took a step forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Greetings, eldest senior sister. Congratulations on your success and coming out of seclusion." Wei Zihong and the other three also came up to congratulate her. Then, the group greeted Tian Kuan and the Wang sisters one by one. After Lu Yeni exchanged a few words with her fellow disciples, she smiled and said, "Since my junior brothers and disciples have arrived, follow me into the palace to pay your respects to master." Everyone nodded in agreement. Lu Yeni hugged her sleeves and turned around, taking the lead, leading the disciples of Zhao Yu up the stairs and moved to the front of the palace door. Jing Yu was already waiting there. Seeing the crowd coming, he bowed from afar, his appearance very respectful. Seeing him like this, Wang Kading teased, "Big head, when did you become so serious?" Jing Yu smiled and cooperated. "This one has always been a serious person." He nodded to the group and then moved to the side to make way for the gate. The disciples' expressions turned serious and they all walked into the palace. When they arrived at the main hall, they saw Zhang Yan sitting on the jade platform with his black robe draped over him. He was clearly in front of them, yet it seemed like he was above them. Lu Yeni bowed first and said, "Yeni greets master." Behind her, Tian Kuan, Wang Kaiwei, Wang Kading, Jiang Zheng, Wei Zihong, Han Zwiqing, Fu Baoxing, and Yuan Jingqing also bowed and said, "Disciple greets master." The third-generation disciples also bowed down and addressed him as patriarch. Zhang Yan smiled, "No need to stand on ceremony. Stand up." The disciples all stood up. However, at that moment, there was the sound of a rumbling flood. The water of the Xian River started to shake, and it seemed like it had turned from limited to limitless. The disciples were shocked and didn't know what had happened. One must know that their master was the Taoist master. What person or thing in the world could spread the commotion to where the Taoist master lived? Zhang Yan stood up and looked towards the limitless yet limitless land. He knew that another person of the same Tao had reached the end realm. Great underworld ancestor. This ancestor obtained all the creation energy and the Tao was able to return it. He was originally not far from the end of the Tao and the ultimate Tao was opened up by him. In the end, what he lacked was filled up and he accumulated 10%. Naturally, he reached the end realm. However, this ancestor didn't stop at all. After he succeeded, he directly left the Tao and didn't leave any traces in the world. This was what he had been waiting for. The next time they met, maybe he would call him Tao friend. Since that was the case, after this banquet, it would be time for the Tao master to leave. However, the Tao of the end could be far and also close, so as an end, he would still stay here. Master? When Zhang Yan heard the disciples call him, he turned around and smiled. He stood with his sleeves behind his back. If there is no opponent in the pursuit of the Tao, how can one compete? That is a fortunate thing. And that you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.